wanted to talk I wanted to talk a little bit today about posture, for a couple of reasons. Mainly, for me, one of the things I've really missed during this pandemic is just not being able to physically be on retreat with each other. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it's great that we've been able to offer Zoom, and as I'm sure you are very much used to at this point, something is definitely better than nothing. And especially at the moment, we just have to make do with what we've got. But as those of you that have been around for a wee while will know, it's amazing how much of this practice is done in just sharing a space with people and then just carrying out the practice. I know for me, one of the things I think I really quite love about sesshin, actually, is that it's just the schedule. It's not really any different, it's just that there's more sitting. And it points to what I think is quite an important part about our practice, that so there's a wholeness that isn't cold. There's an embracing of all the different parts that make up a life. Yes, there's different principles that we might point to at different times, and we each have things that we tend to have to return to time and time again. But like I said, it's never cold. There's always something very human about it. And I think we need to bear this in mind when we think about the basics or the fundamentals of our tradition, in that I think very different to other things we might learn or study or apply ourselves to, they aren't so much fundamentals to be built on in quite the same way. Rather, it's the tradition pointing to those activities that help us feel our way into this wholeness and into this embracing. So, whether it's the posture, like I said, I'm going to speak a little bit about today, or bowing, or ceremonial, or reading scriptures, or keeping the precepts, they're not basic because we build on them later. Rather, they're fundamental because they're moments where we can engage wholeheartedly with our life as it is. And in engaging wholeheartedly with our life, we need to bear in mind that's not about a conformity. None of these things are about holding up a standard that over time we get closer and closer to, or better and better at applying. Like I said, they're a moment for us to experience this wholeness and this embracing. And this isn't in contrast to their complexity. And it isn't hindered in any way by our circumstances. Rather, much like Zazen, it's about what we can learn from these spaces in our lives. That's definitely not to diminish, like I said, other skills or other things that we have to engage with, each to their own place. But like I said, we're not here to develop skills, we're not here to conform to standards. So in many ways we have to take this space on its own terms. And for me, that's where we really come to know the embracing and the wholeness. Great Master Dogen did a commentary of the Scripture of Great Wisdom. It's in the Shobogenzo. generally near the beginning, called Makahanya Haramitsu. And at the beginning of that, he says, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, while experiencing deeply the manifestation of prajna, great wisdom, clearly saw the entire body, that all 5 skandhas are empty. These 5 skandhas, form, feeling, perception, inclination, and discernment, are 5-fold prajna. Clear seeing is prajna. To expound this teaching, it is said that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Form is form, emptiness is emptiness. 100 grasses are thus, myriad forms are thus. So if the skandhas are 5-fold prajna, then form is prajna. If form is prajna, then your body is prajna. Hands and eyes are prajna. The bending of your knees and breathing are all instances of prajna. So if your sitting is prajna, then prajna can't be understood as something apart from you, or else feeling, perception, inclination, and discernment, form and emptiness, are also something apart from you, and we know they're not. To understand Zazen, and therefore our posture is great wisdom, we can't understand it as something that we must strive to attain, and neither can we see it as something that's separate from our daily life, because you'll only ever see in Zazen the body of your everyday daily life. And you're not bound by its limitations in the same way that you're not limited to any of its previous manifestations. I think this is fundamental to any way we'd ever come to approach posture, because in my experience there tend to be 2 common holes that people fall into. The first is that because there is biomechanically a most efficient way to sit, well, we set that up as a standard that we compare our own normally lacking posture against. And so we have a tension there that we either have as the basis of some sort of striving, or that we kind of just try and sweep under the rug and hope it doesn't bother us too much. And the second is that some belief that this body as we find it now, well, we're kind of stuck with it. It's either the hand we've been dealt, or it's something that we have to some limitation that we have to move on despite. And I don't think either of these are very correct. I mean, to be sure, there's a certain truth in them, because there tends to be a certain truth in everything. But I don't find them very helpful for ultimately answering the question of this. Or more importantly, I think, for meeting this in its totality. And I don't think this is very helpful because this, and I don't think this is very helpful because it only understands the body in relation to some external standard or to some vision of itself in time or our expectations. It doesn't take the body on its own terms, so it doesn't take this on its own terms. We are a dynamic whole, and it's in relating to this dynamic whole that the path will always unfold for us. another quote from Great Master Dogen, this time it's from the chapter Kato, Twinning Vines. Ru Jing, my late master, old Buddha, said, "Gourd vines entangle with gourd vines." This teaching has never been seen or heard in the various directions of the past and present. Ru Jing alone spoke it. Gourd vines entangle with gourd vines means that Buddha ancestors thoroughly experience Buddha ancestors. It can be easy to see our practice as a tension with the complex. And though we'll all definitely know that something should definitely simplify over time, I think that this is a big mistake. I think to understand this point correctly, we need to understand the difference between engagement and control. When Great Master Dogen tells us that gourd vines entangle with gourd vines, he's pointing us to a posture of dynamic and total immersion with the world as we are now. Because it is immersion, we must relinquish control without turning away. In the context of our posture, I think this is crucial to both not being overwhelmed by the detail and yet letting those same details guide us. To allow a blending between our own experience of our body and the advice of others. Because to open our eyes and sit upright, we can immediately find this place that's beyond inside and outside, without it just being some philosophical backflip. So part of this is we need to understand what role posture plays in Zazen. Later on, if we've got time, I'll actually try and run through some particular parts of our anatomy, and maybe give you a bit of a guide. But we need to be honest in general about what we're expecting Zazen, how we're expecting Zazen to affect our body. And really not see it as a substitute for either physical exercise or medical intervention. These things aren't extraneous to our practice. These things don't get in the way of a proper or correct way to sit. These things are entanglement as entanglement. I think particularly with medical intervention, if there's something chronic or at least persistent enough that it requires medical intervention, then just sit in a way that's comfortable. Do what you have to do, go through the therapy that you need to go through. This is the totality of your life. And this is the only place that, like I said, the way will open up for you. So understanding what place posture plays in Zazen, that we're not looking to change, control, or meet a standard, that it's about letting this as this open up. To me, I see a lot of it comes down to two principles that end up working together. The first is that we want our body to be balanced, and the second is that we want our body to be soft. By balanced, what I mean is that we have a stability to our posture that doesn't require regular adjustment and that doesn't put any unnecessary strain on our body. And this will mainly be achieved by allowing our weight to drop down to the ground. the degree to which this happens means that the joints and soft tissues of our body can open up. When we release tension like this, the inherent structure of our body can assert itself. And to me this is important because being upright then isn't a position that we're trying to hold or conform to. And balance definitely isn't meant in the same way that, you think of a set of kitchen scales where you have opposing forces and you've found an equilibrium between them. To me, what I mean by balance, and I think what the tradition means by being upright, is a spaciousness that naturally lends itself towards inquiry. So first of all, we should work from the point of view that the body for the most part is actually quite robust. And the Zazen itself isn't And that Zazen itself isn't an exercise in either concentration or endurance. It's perfectly normal through a period of Zazen if you're having to make micro adjustments. And similarly, if you do a lot of sitting, you'll just be stiff. Like, all these things are fine. What we're always going to be concerned with is this whole body listening that itself takes us deeper. And I'd be careful as well, because I personally wouldn't say that our mind and bodies are one. To me, the evidence just doesn't bear that out. But similarly, I wouldn't say that our mind and body are two. To know this body is prajna, we need to dig in and really study what Dogen means by entanglement. And we'll come to know this entanglement the more we have space for balance being inclusive, for the space that we find in Zazen not to be expansive in terms of a standard. I'm sitting in Zazen and I feel expansive, or I'm sitting in Zazen and it feels tight and constricted, but in terms of whatever we see in Zazen as being expansive as a verb, as being a force which includes. And by soft, what I mean is, I think a felt experience of how the stability and balance is attained. And I think in a lot of ways, the quality of the strength that we feel in Zazen. When we sit in Zazen, our body should be active and alert. And the strength to create ourselves, holy moly, that's the statement, and the strength to hold ourselves upright should come from this expansion of the joints. And it should be more of a strength of suspension than a strength of constriction. Now, I definitely don't mean these in terms of good and bad. I'm not going to try and make the argument that constrictive strength is bad. These things have their place. And if it helps, just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, suspension, imagine a suspension bridge. A structure which is much stronger than its individual parts. That when there's a sense of a total balance, it becomes much stronger. And constrictive strength it's a strength that you're all probably more used to and aware of. Think about a rope bridge. It's only as strong as the rope tied to the trees or posts on either end. So when you're lifting up a big heavy box from IKEA, that's constrictive strength. And like I said, we come to know this through a very particular quality. And where I wouldn't say that the mind and body are two, is that, for me at least, the easiest way to find my way into this physical structure is through my awareness. We know what constrictive strength feels like. Our mind has to focus on the point of constriction. And we know what the other end is when we just let our structure collapse, because we know what it feels like when we just let our structure collapse. It's not quite something I can go into, but we know what it feels like when we let our emotions collapse. And I think it's no small thing that they feel the same. If the quality of our zazen is bright and open, our body will be bright and open. Our mind will be bright and open. It doesn't need to be bright and open enough. It doesn't need to be as bright and open as it was yesterday. It's enough that it's this. It's enough that there's a space in our zazen for the tension. That we see it, we feel it, we accept it, and we release it. Because after that, whether the tension goes away or not isn't actually our concern. It's enough that we accept, and it's enough that we release it, that we let it be whatever it's going to be. Because entanglement as entanglement is a posture that's not offended by its individual parts. And I think in many ways this is where the importance of our breath comes in. If our breath is tight and constricted, then we'll just feel sleepy and dull. And I think something to particularly watch out for in Zazen is if your breathing ever starts to become quite shallow, the body can do all sorts to try and cope. You can get everything from odd sensations to what's described in the tradition as makyo, like visions or voices, demons, they would call them demons, visions or voices. And it's just really not good for your body. And like I said, what you're feeling there is a stress. And yet, at the same time, we really don't want to pay particularly close attention to our breath. And I think this is where we need to be quite careful with how Soto Zen shows us the way. Like I said, a quality of our body should be a softness. So our breath should be expansive. It should settle in your lower belly. But apart from that, it should really just be left to take on its own rhythm. It's a part of the whole. So of course it'll show you where various tensions are in the body. Your whole body expands when you breathe. And like I said, this is just a Soto Zen understanding, so I really don't mean to diminish other traditions, but I do find it helpful to acknowledge that I think particularly in traditions that come from China or India, there can be a very, very strong focus on the breath. Depending what tradition you're talking about, it can be seen, working with the breath can be seen as instrumental to awakening itself. Or at the very least, it tends to be seen as a very important mechanic to any growth that's going to take place. And this is fine for those traditions. I think what's important here is that we don't fall into the idea that there's one superior way, or even that there's one way at all anywhere, but that we pay attention to our own tradition. And what helps, no. So there's another quote from Dogen. He gave this as part of a formal sermon in the Dharma hall at Eiheiji, and it was actually near the latter end of his life. In the Mahayana, there is also a method for regulating breath, which is knowing that one breath is long and another breath is short. The breath reaches the dantian and comes up from the dantian. Although exhale and inhale differ, both of them occur depending on the dantian. Impermanence is easy to clarify, and regulating the mind is easy to accomplish. My late teacher, Tiantong Ru Jing, said, "Breath enters and reaches the dantian, and yet there is no place from which it comes. Therefore it is neither long nor short. Breath emerges from the dantian, and yet there is nowhere it goes. Therefore it is neither short nor long." So the dantian is the Japanese pronunciation for dantian, a Chinese term, which can be very tricky to translate and often depends a lot on context. I think for the purposes that it's being used here, it's something of a physical and energetic root. It's found in the middle of the lower abdomen, about 2 fingers down from your navel and just up from your perineum. I want to just read that last bit again. My late teacher, Tiantong Ru Jing, said, "Breath enters and reaches the dantian, and yet there is no place from which it comes. Therefore it is neither long nor short. Breath emerges from the dantian, and yet there is nowhere it goes. Therefore it is neither short nor long." So, as I said before, it's important that we understand the difference between engagement and control. And what a part of that means is that training isn't a process of swapping out one set of expectations for another, more refined set of expectations. So what Great Master Dogen isn't doing here is giving us like 3 levels, where first of all you have your breath settling in your dantian, and then what you have is knowing a long breath is long and a short breath is short, and then what you have finally is neither long nor short, no beginning, no end. Rather, when we approach this from the point of view of gourd vines entangling gourd vines, then there may be a moment of the breath settling in the dantian. There may be a moment of knowing a long breath is long and a short breath is short. What Great Master Dogen is pointing to here is that when you engage with gourd vines as gourd vines, when you allow yourself to become entangled, you won't get stuck on breath rising from the dantian. that there's nowhere that breath goes will show itself naturally to you. To come to know this body as prajna, all we really have to know is to sit with no deliberate thought is the important aspect of serene reflection meditation. So when we come to consider each part of the body in turn, I find it quite helpful to see the difference between just getting settled at the beginning of a zazen, session, and maybe taking some time apart to have a proper look at your posture. Like I said, maybe just give it the time and the attention that it deserves. And of course, secondly, the other side of that, not to get too fixated on something. As I said before, a big part of how we'll find our way with this is through the quality of our awareness. And it's obvious when we say it out loud, but we all fall in the same hole. We can't relax when we become fixated on something. So we all have our aches and pains. We all have the parts of our bodies that give us trouble, and we all have bad days. Just let it go, like I said. Just release it and accept it, and let this be whatever it is. I also find it quite helpful to say that I'm probably not going to actually run through the posture with you, because it's already been about half an hour and I want to give you all a chance to ask questions, so who knows, that might just have to wait for another time. I also had this quote from Dream Within a Dream that I really wanted to get out, but we just don't have any time for it. But one thing I'll say is there are standards for posture, and I think in very mechanical terms we do need to have a way of relating to them. They're advice, they're a guide. We have a skeletal system, so of course by physics there's a most efficient way for our body to be. I think some of the best advice I was ever given was treat your muscles and your soft tissue a bit like the skin of a drum. I quite like this analogy, it makes sense to me quite easily, but it might just be me. If the drum skin's too loose, nothing works, you can't make any sound with the drum. And if the drum skin's too tight, then again it's no good either. So whether it's Daigen or maybe me at another time or your yoga instructor or whoever, if somebody's giving you standards for something, then understand where you are. Okay, try and see where it is that they're pointing you to, or that part of your body to. Pardon me. And then feel your way toward that. It's a bit of a knack, but you should get to a point where it's almost like there's a biting point where something connects and your body starts to naturally coordinate itself. Now, you might be miles and miles and miles away from the standard. I would say at that point the advice is proving unhelpful. The most important thing is that you don't go past that point, because that's when you start to get into that really tight tension. Like everything, the slowest way tends to be the surest way.